Okay, I've had a question from a customer that enjoys using the stamps and has all the media that I've used in these videos, including the discontinued Adirondack lights. This says seashells on it, but they changed the name to Adirondack lights. Light-colored inks. She has a range of tones from Marvy, going from light, medium, and darks in the various hues, okay? And she's tried out a couple different types of glossy paper, and she felt that in watching these videos, the inks weren't applying the same as what she's seen in the videos, okay? Now, everyone's going to have their own touch and their own amount of ink that they use on their sponge tips when they're applied, okay? And everyone has a little bit of a different touch. That was always obvious to me, or apparent to me, in the workshops that I gave. Everyone, it's like handwriting. They have their own kind of signature, and touch. So, but what I was curious about was, she asked me if she could send me in some of those papers and I can kind of play around with it and see what I thought. Okay, and so that's what this video is about. She sent me in her original piece. Okay, now I did a couple tweaks on here, so now we have a collaborative piece, but I was just talking about some shadows, and I wanted to see how it applied to this scene that she did. And because I didn't know what type of paper this one was. I wasn't quite sure what brand it was. So I asked her also to be sure and write on the back of it, these papers, what type of paper she was sending over, so we can do, we can compare and contrast. So specifically going with Ranger and the chrome coat paper right there, and I wanted to keep in the spirit of her scene right here, so I did a similar composition, just sans the quote stamp here, okay? I find, if you watch this video, you'll see, but I found that these two papers reacted in a similar fashion as far as the impressions went, and as far as the color application went. I found that they worked, very nicely in those respects. The thing that I found interesting, though, was this is the first one that I did here, the Ranger paper. I got a good slathering of re-inker ink fluid, just in my little palette here, dipped in, and I really spread that around in a very thick application. It was slathered with that very light colored blue, and in the end, I think what it did was going over these black images that I stamped out, I think it lightened them up a little bit, okay? I don't know what it did chemistry-wise, but that seems to be the case, because the areas where I didn't go over it, it looks darker, okay? But now on this one, and it wasn't really a true test because I I did this one, and this, applicator was still slathered, full of ink, so I used the remaining ink on this one. So I probably didn't apply as much ink to this paper as I did to this paper, but it was still pretty saturated. But I don't see that kind of that lighter value kind of effect on the chrome coat as I did on this one. But as far as my ink saturations, I like them both. As far as my impressions, I like them both. This one looks fine to me. Now these ones down here, you can see how much darker those reeds are than that tree, okay? It's like 100% black, and that's like a 95 or something percent black. It's because I stamped these last, so I didn't use any of those the Ranger inks over the top of these, alright? So that you can get some very dark impressions. I don't know, maybe you just use less if you're using like the Adirondack lights over the top of it if you want to retain that dark impression. I don't mind this being a little bit lighter, as long as I get the contrast going from somewhere in here. And let's see, what else? I applied some additional streaks of color onto Linda's piece right here, just in the shadows and stuff, because I didn't know what paper I was using here on this one, or what one she used, so I just wanted to see if the inks would apply the same as they did in these other ones right here, and I think it did. So, anyways, I talk about a little bit of ergonomics when you're applying your ink. As I've been requested to do in this video, keep things nice and ergonomic, and your application should go on nice and smoothly and without issues to any part of the joints or arms. You know, I always like to keep my motion in a nice ergonomic motion, and the position of my wrist and arm plays a part. If I'm kind of out of position, you know, doing some kind of awkward movement, I'm probably going to feel it in some area, possibly in your shoulder, possibly in your wrists, finger joints, or something like that, okay? So keep it light, you know, you don't want to iron grip on your media, you want to keep it nice and loose, you know. This is just very loosely held in my paper, in my hand, and as I apply my inks onto the paper, and it's in this type of motion right here, so, you know, just nice and graceful motion. My hand is angled at the right position, so when I'm applying this in, I'm just changing the angle of the paper, okay? And I let this hand do the work. Okay, if I'm applying it from this angle, I change the angle of my paper accordingly. It's just as if you're doing scissors, you know. Some people do this with the scissors, you know, they're moving this hand all over the place and holding it like this, but it's easier to do this, you know. And see, the hand that's doing a lot of the work is just kind of staying in a nice ergonomic position. You might change around subtly, but, you know, you change your, you know, this around, it's easier, okay? More along the lines of paper, but ergonomics is what it's all about, okay? And being aware of it, and kind of creating a muscle memory as far as the way you're using things is important too. If you're just getting into this, this is not a motion that I know of that we're doing very often, unless you're some sort of painter or something like that, you know? We're not doing this a lot, so it takes, you know, it doesn't take a real long time to get used to, and the more ink you have on there, the easier it slides across your paper, so don't try to get too dark with more pressure, okay, or force, okay? Do it with repetition, and just ink up your wands, and keep it nice and ergonomic, and color will build up, especially if it's these types of papers right here with the Ranger and Chrome coat, okay? And the mystery paper, it's probably one of these. I'm guessing it's the, I guessed it was the Ranger paper, but I could be mistaken, so. Anyways, if you choose to watch this video, I hope it comes in handy for you. I know I get questions on paper all the time, and these papers are all out there and available at different locations. You can do a web search on them and whatnot, and I don't know. I enjoyed doing this, and hope you enjoy the process as it unfolds. So, fun stuff. Okay, I have received a request by someone to test out some papers here, so I thought I would do it in video form. They have mentioned to me that the ink applications do not seem to be the same as what I'm doing here in the videos and what they're achieving at home using the same media. So what I'm going to do, as I've requested that they send me in a couple samples of the paper that they're using, and one of them is the CTI paper, the Chrome coat, and that's the one that I've been recommending to people to try out. That seems to be the industry standard these days. And another one that she has tried is the Ranger Gloss paper, okay? Now, the Ranger Gloss, I do not know what paper, what manufacturer is making this paper that Ranger has kind of repackaged. So they could very well be the same. They look slightly different to me, but with glossy papers, it's really hard to eyeball and to determine, you know, one kind of surface from the other. They look very similar until, you know, until you start using them, it's really hard to see if the if you know the way they accept ink is similar, different, or very different. Okay. Now I've done some previous tests on 3 different samples of paper that I got from this place called Kelly Paper, and they all took the inks quite differently. Okay, and you can check back and reference my other videos for that. I think it was called the Glossy Paper Tests or something like that. But I believe the chrome coat was the one that I came out with thinking that that one was the best. And I haven't tried this Ranger one before, so I'll be curious to see that. Now, I've asked her, I said you can either just email me a scene that you've done and let me take a look and see what's happening on the paper. And she sent me an original. And when I look at this, I don't see any difference between the papers that I'm using and this one, okay? Now I've asked her to also let me know what inks that she's using, because that can make a difference. So luckily she's using the same inks that I'm using in terms of kind of a base layer of Adirondack Lights, quite typically, in combination with Marvy ink pads, okay? So we'll go through that same type of media, and I'm going to do it on these 2 cards. Now, one of the things that I'm going to be doing as well is she's mentioned that she has muscular dystrophy, and she might be have to compensate for that in the way that she applies the inks, okay? And she mentions that she has to rest her wrist on the table to apply it. Now, when I'm doing this, I don't have my hand, you know, sometimes I have my hand suspended, but I can easily just set my hand down and apply it this way, okay? And this is applying ink onto the paper, okay? Another thing that you can always do, too, is you don't have to rest your hand on a table. Let's say I have something, I would get like a pillow or something, and you can raise your hand and it rests a little bit higher, and then you're doing the same type of application, but your wrist is supported and the ink is being applied in. Now she's mentioned, she's wondered if I could experiment with the possibility of placing the paper vertically instead of turning it on its side and sweep sideways to the middle. That's not going to be an ergonomic way to do things. If I do, I think this is what she means, okay? If I'm placing the paper, I'm not sure about vertically and turning it on side. Okay, so if I kind of read that correctly, I think she's saying, can I do it this way, okay? This way is a lot more work, okay? This is not an ergonomic way to do this thing. If I turn this and I do this, this is ergonomic, and it's a nice, natural, graceful way to do it. I'm moving the least amount of muscles possible, okay? Than to move my whole arm and shoulder this way, okay? And my wrist is very stiff this way, okay? If I do something like that. But let's just kind of proceed here, and I'll show some various kind of tweaks as far as the application of this goes, and we'll see where we get to, okay? So let's take a look at this composition that she has done. It's a really fantastic composition. She has a really smooth application of color. I mean, I don't see any harsh sponge shapes in here at all. And by the way, she's using the stylus tools. I think that's what she said according to her note. I see saturations of color in here. I don't know, there's very smooth transitions of value throughout. So I don't see really anything in here to critique per se, but we're looking at this from also a technical standpoint as far as the color application goes, okay? This is if I applied the inks onto this paper using my media, I'm convinced that that would be how it would look. Now, one thing that I would do is, if you'll notice that from the sky to the water, there's a difference in value, okay, and intensity, okay? There's nothing wrong about that. You can do that, but in here she's gone probably through the number 10 blue. She said she had a transition going from light to dark colors with the Marvy inks, so I'm assuming that means that she's using these 3 colors in here. The reason why colors, you don't see too much of this dark blue in this saturation is because she's applying it over the lighter tones, and she's doing it in the way that I've recommended, in that you kind of streak it in gradually. You don't want to get just a full saturation as if you've just taken directly inked to paper or something like that and got a really super harsh streak. But what I was getting at here was there isn't any of this darker tone being used in the sky, and that's something that I would do. Even if it was just a little bit up here in the corners, I would do that to kind of match the intensity and value of what's going on here, even if it's in a very limited way, because it would make the scene a little bit more balanced in terms of visual weight, okay? It could just be this little edge up here, and it would create a little bit more of a vignette instead of the scene being kind of bottom heavy. It would still have the same overall feel, but you're just doing a little bit of a tweak that would kind of contain the composition just one extra little step, and it would also kind of bring the viewer's attention down here in a subtle way. But I think the viewer kind of picks that type of thing up, which doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with this. I would just kind of add it in at this point in time. But let's go in and let's see what's happening here as far as the inks go. Another thing that I noticed just kind of observing this is that some of these images, and I'm assuming that the same black ink pad was used, okay? So this one right here has been stamped out, and this black is a lot darker than this one in the background. I don't think that she used a gray, because I don't know of any gray in that value. Usually the gray tones are something like this type of gray tone, okay? This is more indicative of a black that has stamped out kind of in a more, I would say in 90% gray tone or something like that, but it's a little bit 90%, but in here it seems more 100%. And that could be just the length of time that the stamp was sitting on the paper. It could be the combination of the ink and paper, and that's what we're going to try to ascertain right now. Okay, let's see. I need to start off with my black pad. That one's a little bit dry. Excuse me. Okay, so let's see here. Now, I might not finish these scenes off completely, because that's a lot of stamp. She's stamped on a half-page format here. And let's see. I will probably, I want to see how the inks are laying and absorbing and drying on the paper. Okay, let's go with the Lakeside Cove here. Grabbing my acrylic block here. It's a little bit large. Not sure where my kind of narrower one is, but this will do fine. Okay. I'll need to go 2 impressions. Okay, let me try to, I'm going to try to keep this straight, okay? This is the Ranger gloss on the, I'll take the Ranger gloss on the right and the Chrome Coat on the left. Let me see what, she didn't say what one this is, I don't think, in that letter. Well, we'll just see, because we need to find out how this affects both of these pieces. Okay. Let's see. Stamping it roughly about like so, as far as its position. Okay. Yeah, that one's stamped out a little bit lighter, but you can see it's in the center of that. What was that? That was Ranger, right? Okay, now she sent me 2 pieces of paper, so of each one. So let me see this right here. Okay, Ranger. Let me use this as this is my second Ranger piece. Let me do this again here. I can stamp on this fine, but let me just make an assessment here. Let me apply this a little bit longer and use a little bit more pressure in the center of the stamp, okay? The sides are fine, but let's check out the center of this, okay? Now I'm just going to hold this on here for an extra 5 seconds or something like that, then the other one. I don't know. Don't time me and rewind. Don't hold me to that. Maybe I'm doing this a little bit longer. Okay, that's a little bit better. Not bad. I don't know, maybe my second one was lighter because this ink pad's a little bit drier or something like that. Let's go on. But that's perfectly acceptable to me. Those impressions, if I were to stamp that on any piece of paper, it would be absolutely fine in terms of the value. It didn't stamp. What I don't like is stamping something out and it's like a 95 or like a 90% or below. Sometimes people's ink pads are more like an 85% gray than a 100% black. But if it's 95% black to 100, and that's certainly what I'm looking for most of the time, then that's fine. Now I look at her scene that she stamped out, and I can tell her black pad is juicier than mine. Maybe I'll try to re-ink here actually, just to try and match that. Okay, this was the CTI crown coat. Okay. It's stamped out. I don't know if you can tell any difference here. They both look pretty good though, don't they? But visually, I think the chrome coat stamped out darker, okay? Now that's probably going to play a role in the ink application, but we'll see. I don't know. Maybe, you know, I've just done 1 impression or 2 impressions on the Ranger and 1 impression on this. So let me see if that is going to be something that's in the paper, or if it was just, did I use more ink on the chrome coat? We haven't done enough testing here to figure that one out. Okay. Pines and rocks. Okay, shall we do the same thing then? I will go with pines and rocks. First. Okay, I think she has that about like so in her scene. It's a very nicely composed image. Okay, now this one we're talking about a very large stamp, so what I do is I stand up and I apply pressure. See, I don't have to use so much of my wrist or hands or something like that if I can just kind of lean into it with my whole body. Now, just because I don't know about this paper, I'm taking more time on it than I really ever do. That looks beautiful to me. That looks 100% black. Okay. So in the background, I probably just didn't apply enough pressure. Okay, now again, that was the Ranger. And let's do the same thing with the chrome coat. And like I said, these papers could be identical, you know, as far as the manufacturer goes. The one thing that's nice about the Ranger is if you don't want you know, like a ream of, you know, 200 pieces, you can pick it up by the 10 pack or something like that. It costs more per piece, but if you're not using too much of it, you know, 10 sheets will give you, you know, 40 quarter-size cards, which is quite a bit. Okay, same thing with the CTI. It's a beautiful, smooth impression, okay? Nice and dark. And very flat. That's one of the beautiful things about glossy cardstock, is that it's smooth, it's coated, but it accepts ink, of course. But it can really give you a really pure impression. Alright, now let's see. Did she use... Okay, she's gone with the stamps like this and like this. And we'll do the same type of thing. We'll use this 2 times, alright, to create a nice foreground as a kind of a viewing perch for the viewer looking into the scene. Gotta make sure I didn't switch my papers. This is the Ranger right here. Standing up, large stamp. Now remember, when we get down to the smaller stamps, don't use as much pressure. It's about the kind of the distribution of pressure across the surface of the stamp, and it's not even about the size of the stamp, it's about the amount of surface a stamp has, okay? So if you're using, you know, an outline and it's a real thin line, then you don't need to use too much pressure because there's not a lot of surface area to a design like that. But where designs are tonal like this, okay, there's a lot of surface area on this, so, you know, there's a distribution of the amount of pressure that you're using, and you have to adjust accordingly, okay? Alright. Second impression. Right. And those impressions look beautiful to me. They look very full and dark. Okay. And I'm not using extraordinary pressure or something like that to try and compensate for the surface. This is, you know, what I usually do in terms of making my impressions. And this black pad isn't overly juicy or anything like that, so in other words, it seems to be doing what it's doing so far, but the real test will be how much ink we use on the scene, and we'll see how the surface of the paper reacts to that type of buildup of inks. Okay, again, I'm working on the chrome coat. So far, so good. No visible differences or weaknesses from one to the other. Like I said, that first one is just like my first print. Maybe I didn't have enough ink on the stamp or something like that, too. Okay, now let me take a look. I'm kind of holding this at a bit of an angle, see if the ink is built up a little bit or, you know, puddled in any way. Not really in this image because I stamped it before, but some of the ink right in here in these solid areas, there's a little ball of ink, black ink, that hasn't dried yet. Maybe that's what I'll do. You know what I think I'm going to do? Because this is a test and we're kind of evaluating, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp out most of my imagery first, okay? And then I'm going to allow it to sit for a little bit. And then what we'll do is we'll go back in and we'll do the ink application into it. But as far as you guys go, there won't be any delay at all. But that's going to be my process. Okay. We know that the papers accept the black ink just fine in terms of the main imagery. Let's take a look at this cloud cumulus stamp. It's the 018E stamp, and I'm using it with a salvia blue. So we'll see how this paper accepts lighter tones, and I don't expect it to be any different than the darker tones, so that's good. Okay, changing my angle a little bit with each impression. I think that looks just fine. It is a bit busy, but don't worry about that because we're going to be you know, adding some tone up there, so not all of the clouds will be kind of visible or showcased, okay? With my cloud stamp, what I'm doing is when I stamp it out, I have most of my pressure in the middle, okay? I'm not rocking this back and forth, you know, getting a really super heavy outliney square edge, okay? See, we can see the edges right here, but what I'm going to do is I'll just change my angle like this and go right on into them about 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch or so. Okay, there's a lot of tolerance as far as your application of that. One of the things you can do in water scenes is, if you want to, you can also stamp this upside down to represent kind of a reflection in the water's surface with the sky. But she didn't do that, so her scene looks great too, okay? I'm just saying that that's an option. And she's used a lot of the water texture in here to differentiate the textures from here to the sky, okay? So in keeping with the spirit of that composition, let's not do any clouds down here, because we want to do we want to be able to compare and contrast and find out what's going on. Okay, now let's see. One of the things that I usually do, and you can watch a video on this, but it's I did a video on how to do water, and one of the things I did with the water texture stamp is that I added it in after I've added the tones in, okay? And I usually do it in colors out of my color scheme to make it a little bit more shimmery. This one here is more textured because it's done in black, okay? And I think that's fine too. It just creates a little bit of a deeper looking contrast within those ripples themselves. For me, it turns it to, you know, a little bit later on in the day, possibly. It looks like dusk or post-dusk or something like that. Oh, but another thing that she's done too, and I could save this for the, maybe I will. See these reeds down here? Those are really great foregrounds that she's done them at different heights and changed the angle. But I'm going to wait till the end to add that in there, just because when I add in all these kind of brown tones, like on the rocks, I I think it just looks a little bit more crisper if you do the foreground impressions at the end. Okay, so that being said, let's see. I'm thinking about adding in some of these water textures. Let me just do that. I'm going to do that in... I'll do it in multiple values. Okay, I'll show you what I was talking about. I mean, I can do this later on too, but since I'm going to be waiting for this to dry anyway, why don't we just add it in right now? Okay, so I'm just going on with the salvia blue. Into my water. I can tell I just stamped over some of these trees, and some of those trees are a little bit wet as far as the ink goes right now. And you notice I'm not bothering to mask off my rocks down here. I don't think I need to. I stamped it over some of these rocks, and you really can't say, oh my gosh, there's some water going into that. Plus these rocks are going to get toned with the use of various brownish earth tones. And again, this is the Ranger here, going on with the Glossy CTI Chrome Coat stock. Okay, this textured surface, and then let's go with the black. I could use some medium tone blues in there too, which would be good, but let's just go with black for right now, because I want to be able to match her kind of textured water ripples. Okay, something like that. It looks really, really busy, but that's fine because we're going to be adding more tone to the water. So far, these papers are performing pretty well. Or, I don't know, no different than what I felt. But, again, we're just making impressions, and those are easy in terms of, you know, the response of the paper to the application of ink. Okay. We have our foundations established here as far as our main compositions go. Okay, CTI Ranger. Alright, first evaluation, assessment, whatever. All's well. What I'm going to do next in terms of the color application is I'll start off with some of my, let's see, Ranger Adirondacks Aqua, which is discontinued ink, but she has it. And I think you could still find that color out there somewhere. Just do kind of a search on it. Aqua, we're going to establish our lighting scheme in here. Okay. We'll keep our some of our clouds nice and light. Some areas down here with on the water surface, some lighter tones, okay? And then we'll just work basically through these three colors here, okay? So it's going to be a kind of a minimal color scheme. Oh, on those rocks, she likes to have those rocks kind of an earthy brown tone, so we'll bring some of that into it. And we'll bring some of the water blue into these rocks as well, because, you know, it'll just create a little bit more continuity. so I don't want to forget about this one later, the reed stamp. Alright, so let's just let this set up for a little bit and come back to it and start applying our tones and have have some fun. I'm curious, myself to see the differences, if any, between the two surfaces. Okay, we have the composition stamped out now. We are on step 2 of the process here, and these are two very large scenes, relatively speaking, which equate to one full size scene if I were doing an 8.5 by 11. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expedite the process here by just using Adirondack lights. Re-inker fluid, and you can do this with whatever color you're working with. In terms of coverage of larger spaces, okay? With whatever color you're working with, if it's the lightest color, it's going to get the most amount of coverage typically in this type of technique. So if you want to go for fast coverage, you can just ink up whatever sponge tip applicator you happen to be using. And again, this is the Color Box Stylus tool, and we're just going to go with that. Okay, so alright, now one of the things about applying ink, let me see if I can zoom out a little bit more here so you can see my hand and arm. Okay, this is going to be a nice ergonomic application. My hand is in contact with my table, okay, and I'm just applying this on like so. You can use some sort of brace underneath here if you want to, like this, okay. This is actually very comfortable. It's just a little paper towel thing, something like that would work. Okay. And it's just a nice smooth application of color. Now I'm turning my card because doing this and doing it this way is not going to be ergonomic. This is the motion right here, okay? And I'm not pressing into this paper at all. I'm not using pressure or anything like that. It's just gliding across the paper. Nice and smoothly. My preference is to leave a little bit of white on the surface of water. Look at this. See, I can even roll on this right here like so. I don't know, maybe I'll have to incorporate this into my technique, kind of a wrist brace. Okay, now if I want to get in this side, you just apply it like this. See, this is the motion that I'm doing right here. This is all I'm doing, okay? See? And it's at an angle. Your hands naturally go like this. That's why they used to make those ergonomic keyboards like this. I don't know, I haven't seen those in a while, but there was this little joint in the middle of an ergonomic keyboard, but I don't know if they're really still making those or not. I haven't looked at all, and it hasn't been important to me, but I had one at one point in time for one of my computers. Okay, that's pretty good coverage of that first color. Now I don't know if I would notice anything with the first color in terms of a difference in the way that a surface accepts the ink. It will kind of reveal itself more in the medium to darker tones, I would think, as far as saturations and application, feel, etc. Okay, let's go. Okay, now that one was the Ranger. Okay, this is the chrome coat right here. Now this is a very light color, okay? Keep that in mind. So sometimes the feeling is that you have to press harder to get more ink to transfer, and thus for the scene to get darker. But we're not looking for that, you know, and that's not going to happen because this is a very light ink, you know, and at full saturation it's not going to be very dark. So see, this first color is kind of like a lubricant for the page if you're indeed using something like an Adirondack Lights hue. I seem to recall, yeah, this ink of mine is a little bit, this aqua is a little bit more green, so it's I don't know, that's just the color that they happen to come up with in that batch, I guess. It's really more blue from most of the aquas that I've used in the past. This particular re-inker was a little bit more greenish. But not to worry, because in the end result it's really not going to matter. Alright, so there is our first coat. Very similar. Actually, this one might be sitting on the surface a little bit more. Yeah, maybe it is. Okay. So that's my first, you know, observation. I don't know, it could be that I just had more ink in this applicator when I was doing this first scene. Let's see. Okay, yeah, that ink is kind of sitting on the surface a little bit longer. But we'll see if that plays a factor, you know, in the next few colors. Okay, let's go with the Ranger again. Now this surface is pretty saturated. I mean, I can feel this, and it's pretty wet. Okay, just because, you know, I had a puddle of ink on my palette there, and you know, I sopped most of it up on this one, so that's going to play a role. There's probably less ink on the CTI, so that's not going to have, you know, so if we see some changes as far as the, you know, differences go between the two papers, it could just be that I used more of that ink than, you know, than the other cardstock, so keep that in mind as well. You know, we just don't have enough of a sampling to, you know, to make any definitive comments at this point in time. We'll see that if, you know, we'll see how things look in the end, if there really is a noticeable difference between the two surfaces. Okay, now, the Ranger inks are pretty thick, so as I'm applying this blue Marvy ink, it's not transferring very quickly to the paper. And that's not a bad thing, though, okay? Because it gives you time to really kind of spread it around. Like, if I do this, this is the worst technique possible. Okay? That didn't leave this real super definitive mark like that right here, because look at this. I can just really spread it around. You see how easy it is to kind of spread that ink? It's like, it almost feels like you're applying ink to glass or something of that sort, okay? And that's what happens when you apply a lot of that thicker ink as a base layer. These thinner inks, such as the Marvy, okay, now I'm switching over to the CTI. Thinner inks like the Marvy will spread around on that thicker ink very nicely because you have that foundation coating, not coding, but coating of thicker ink. So you're working from thin to, thick to thin, I guess you can say. If you're working thick to thick, that's fine too, like if you have mementos other Marvy brands, Ranger brands, Vinks, but just about every brand that I know of are fairly thick except for Marvy. And I was telling someone recently, I don't see that as a either or type of thing. I just use them both in conjunction with one another, to focus on their strengths. The thicker one provides a nice foundation, but by the time you get into third or fourth ink, if you haven't let the card dry a little bit, it's really going to be hard to apply any more ink to get things darker if you want them to. Okay, that's the Salvia blue, and that looks fine to me. Okay, the next one will be the number 10 light blue Marvy ink, and I don't foresee any problems just based around what I feel right now in terms of the ink on the surface of this card. Alright, so Ranger, right hand, CTI Marvy, not Marvy, but CTI Chrome Coat in the left hand, okay? They both look fine to me. Let's go on here. And we'll move up into our next value of blue. This is the number 10 blue. Now every time you change colors, I always kind of use it in a little area and get a feel for it. See how dark it's going to be, so see how fast it applies to the paper. Okay. And again, I'm keeping in mind my wrist action and keeping it nice and ergonomic, okay? If I want to make a streak across this way, this is an easier way to go by having it like this, because it makes my hand motion very easy. If I'm going like this, then I'm going like this, okay? And I'm using my whole shoulder. You can't see it in the video right here, but, it makes it harder to apply. I wouldn't say that it's hard to apply, but it's certainly harder than just kind of moving two fingers, for the most part, in this swatched kind of motion right here, okay? So I kind of smash that down a little bit. I don't press it in like that. I'm just saying I kind of rest it and I lift. Press, lift, press, lift. See, so what it looks like over time is it looks like this. You see how that transitions out to nothing? Making my shadows a little bit darker. I have to kind of do that with a tapping motion. Otherwise, if I streak across here, there's a lot of ink that's laying on the surface of the paper, so that is kind of surface oriented. So right now, so what I'll have to do is I'll let it set up a little bit. I don't know if it's, it might just take a minute here, and in the meantime I'll do the rest of it. Sometimes it takes longer. It depends how wet your inks are, how humid it is outside. If it's very dry and you're in an arid location in the world, then these inks will dry faster. Okay, so here we go, like so. Let's add some of that to the sky area. Did you see that technique that I did? Sometimes I put a little bit of ink there in the corner, and I'll take and I'll swipe it away. Or I'll swipe it into the scene, I should say. Right. Okay. I guess you can see what it looks like with this color blue and without. Light brilliant blue is a really great blue. It's a very bright blue. There's a lot of saturated kind of crystalline I don't know, appearance qualities to it. You know, this paper right here, this chrome coat, feels a little bit drier to me, but again, it could just be, you know, the Ranger just, I had a ton of that Adirondack Lights ink in this tip when I was, you know, applying that one, you know, applying it to the paper on that card first. So this one is noticeably drier, though, on the surface. Again, I'm inclined to think it has more to do with the with that first color, though, just the amount of it that was used. But we shall see. Maybe, hopefully. Okay. Okay, but both, I think, are looking and feeling, I guess more importantly, pretty good. Let's go to the number 3 blue. It's kind of a navy blue. Let's start off with the Ranger again. Okay, and again, I'm just kind of resting my hand on this paper towel. It's kind of an empty paper towel roll, as you can see. Okay. Go for that little vignette look. Okay, this blue is going on very nicely. Kind of oscillated a little bit if you want it kind of streaky, in other words. I'm doing a few of these types of things, like this. Then I'm coming down here and I'm adding in like that. Then you can kind of do it from the opposite way, going this way. The ends don't have to match up at all. And I'm kind of using the side of my tonal, my stylus tool. Alright, let's see. So far, so good. I don't foresee like anything different. I can get a feel for the paper at this point in time. I can't say anything about the Ranger gloss and if it feels any different to me than this one, just based around the paper characteristics. Like I said, I think I just made that first saturation with the Adirondack Lights blue, aqua. I think I just added a lot more of that to that first scene, but you know, by the time I get around to this, what is it, third or fourth color, the dark blue, both surfaces feel pretty similar to me. I don't think there's too much of a difference so far. I don't know, could still yet reveal itself, I'm not sure. Alright, so no changes. Let's take a look at the saturations here. This one's getting darker, but again, I'm not quite sure if that's because I use more of the lighter tone on this one, and when you start to streak in here, sometimes you're kind of removing ink, in other words. But I'm not sure if that's the case. It could be. Well, it could be, yeah, because if I apply more of this blue, it's getting darker now. You know, because the surface is drying a little bit, so it's more accepting of more tone. Alright, so now this one's darker. This is the chrome coat one here. Alright, let's see. Okay. The more similar these things come out, the less there is really to say about, you know, anything to say about them, because there really isn't any contrast, I don't think. In terms of what the content of this video is about, okay, it's about kind of exploration and discovery as far as media goes, but I know there's not a whole lot to contrast against it. Okay, Ranger. This is going with that number blue again, adding a little bit more, because I find that the more I add, the darker it gets, because I think the page is slowly getting drier. But, okay, let's stop right there. Let's start addressing some of these rocks, okay, and the cabin too. I don't think there's much more to say about the water in terms of defining it. I could go one step darker if I wanted to, but we'll see. Maybe black, because I have used black in the scenes, so sometimes that's kind of the binding tonal quality that will kind of bring everything together even more so. Okay, let's look at some these rocks. Let's see, I'm not sure if I have my Peach Bellini handy, but let me check. Peach Bellini is kind of a, well, it's peach colored, okay? It's very light if it's in the Adirondack Lights family of tones. Okay, it's all fairly light, of course. Okay, over that. Here's these ones right here. Okay, we'll put in some variation on these when we get to some of these colors. And in coloring these rocks, toning them, I haven't forgotten about the reeds stamp that I'll be putting in on the foreground. We'll see how that stamp takes to different inks. Okay. Okay. That was a Seashells Peach Bellini, but it's called Adirondack Lights Peach Bellini in the last probably 10 years or something like that, before they discontinued the entire Adirondack line. But like I said, you can probably still find these if you do an internet search on them. Okay, this is going with the pale orange. It's number 16 color from Marvy. Okay, now if you want to kind of oscillate a little bit of light or put a little bit of light on some of your rocks, then leave them. Don't go over them too much with other colors, okay? I don't feel anything different as far as the usage of ink on this goes. It still feels like both of them are kind of CTI-ish type of paper. Okay, let's get on to one of my favorite tones, which is the number 6 brown. I don't know, it doesn't necessarily appeal to me from a visual standpoint, but in terms of stamping it, I don't know, it's always addressed a lot of the weaknesses that I happen to have in my scenes. You add that number 6 brown over across some imagery, and it just seems to kind of mellow things out. I use it with a lot of really hot colors, okay, that are super bright. Same type of thing if you're just applying things onto rocks. I can take and with my trusty wrist support actually, hand support, you can apply some tones that way. Ranger, okay. Now, one of the differences between her scene and mine is that I've just retained a little bit of the lighter area down in the water. Okay. And it's a similar value. I used a lot more number 10 blue on here than she did on hers, but it could also just be that my ink hasn't dried yet, so, you know, it looks much more deep and glossy, which is not a bad thing, because if you want to, you can always take it into an acrylic crystal, you know, a crystal, I want to say crystal clear, but that's the Krylon name for one of their acrylic sprays. And I bought a ton of that over the years. Okay. Bring some in on the cabin in the distance. Put a little bit on those little rocks on the shore. Okay. Which one is which? Ranger? Chrome coat. Okay. Now, let's see. Alright, where did my dark brown go? Okay, this is the dark, no, it's black. Oh, here's my dark brown. Let's go to this one. Ooh, my pad is super juicy. Not a problem, because the ink is on the surface is wet, so it really allows me to spread it out. foreground shadows for those rocks. Just applying this ink with a very delicate touch. It looks like something like this. Okay, and I would do it with a touch that's, you know, the sponge is kind of drier, just so it's not leaving such kind of deep, you know, marks. Okay, now not all of your applications are streaks like that. You can do this type of touch right here to apply a little bit of tone wherever you want it to go. Okay. Back on the cabin. Alright, now what I like to do is I like to bring in some black. And that will be good for this scene too, as far as an experiment goes, because what you're doing is you're taking the full kind of a value range of a given area, and you're working through all those tones, so if there is going to be any kind of build-up problem or kind of a weird kind of resisting of the colors, it will show, you know, it'll reveal itself the darker you go. Well, maybe not. It'll reveal itself the more layers of ink you put down. It doesn't mean that they all have to be dark, you know. But like anything else, it just kind of starts to reach super saturation, and we want to see where that is. Okay, so it's a little bit right in here and down here. If there is any kind of difference in terms of the two papers, one of them might be slightly more sealed than the other, glossier but not visibly glossier, and not necessarily glossier than what I use. Okay. Let's go with these reeds in the foreground. Now, this is going to be stamping wet into wet, so let's see how that goes. With this paper and with these inks, I'm just using the Marvy ink black. Okay, there's not a lot of surface area to the stamp, so just light, even pressure. And in keeping with the ergonomic spirit of things, if I stamp it like this, okay, see how my hand goes like this? That's not natural for me, so I'm tilting this way, and I can just stamp it down like that. And I don't have to go like this, you know, and, you know, use pressure on my wrists in any way. I'm always keeping my wrist straight, and I'm just, you know, it's kind of a conservation of movement, you can say. And I think things come out more smoother that way, because we're kind of keeping in our natural you know, movements. Alright, not sure if I want to add in that boating fisherman. I can if I want to make it really complete, but okay, let's take a look here. See if there's any kind of noticeable change. You know, you can put these two things together and they blend in just fine, right? So that tells me that this, let's look at this blue area right here in this blue. It's pretty good. Or down here, let's go like that. Let's take a look at this side right here. Those two areas. This area right here, I probably didn't use as much dark brown as I did here. That's why it's darker. There's two cabins. There's the water right there. Looks pretty good. Alright, now... Okay, now as this sets up a little bit, let's take some just visual observation here. I'm seeing this one, this tree, as it dries, it seems to be getting a little bit, yeah, see that? It seems to be getting a little bit lighter here than here, right? It's not because this one's wet, okay? Alright, now, I think, seeing as though that looks a little bit lighter, I think what we're going to have to do is allow these to dry to make a further assessment as far as this next step goes. Maybe I'll grab that boating fisherman as well. But let's allow these to dry and let's see what they look like. And they might have to be sprayed too. The great equalizer of any type of surface and ink combination is acrylic sprays. It brings out the natural depth of all the different layers, and it might even look shinier and glossier and deeper than it did when you had wet ink on that glossy paper. So we'll do a little more testing here and see what we can come up with. But right now, all seems pretty similar, okay? We'll see if this one dries a little bit duller though, and then you know, we'll know about that at that time. Okay, we're back about, I think I've given it about an hour, give or take a little bit. And that's to kind of set up here and to probably dry. I do notice that this one, the Ranger, seems to be drying a little bit more flat, I think. Let's do a little comparison between the trees, okay? Alright. Doesn't seem to be too different down here, though, but maybe that's because there's less surface area, but I don't think so. Well, I don't know, this Ranger one down here in the Marines looks a little bit darker, you know, than this one, so... Let's take a look over here where there's a pretty decent saturation of ink. This one looks a little bit glossier, but I don't know, this one could be, I don't know, a little bit wet still. I don't know. But the black here definitely looks a little bit lighter. Now, that being said, what we'll do is, let's see if I have some spray fix. Kind of run. I need to go make a run on some run for some what am I trying to say here? I need to go get some like some Krylon Crystal Clear, Krylon UV, or some of that Ace Hardware PSD or P something spray fix, clear acrylic spray. One of those. It doesn't really matter. And spray this down, but I do have some spray fix, and I'll try that on here. It could bring back the depth of the black there, but we'll see. Okay. Now, let's take this boating fish, and we might as well go all the way and stamp out the same thing that Linda has on her scene. Okay. Alright. Now here's what I'd like to do here. I like to kind of wipe off the edge of kind of rectangular images with a little bit of tone around the main image. And that's so that those dots on the edge don't stamp out too thick. Okay. Now, small images, less pressure, but center pressure. So I usually have my finger right on top, and the sides of these are just to hold things stable, okay? Same thing again, kind of wipe off with a dry paper towel or something like that around the edges. Now, I'm doing that because this area in here is a little bit lighter. If it was darker, you know, you can get those dots all around the perimeter and it wouldn't stand out so much, but I am stamping it into a lighter area, so let's go for a little bit of a lighter touch around the edges. Okay. So we have these two guys standing out. The impressions look good to me in terms of the depth of color. And those two little boats are looking a little bit... Now, this isn't color application, a color application comment, which this video is about, but they need to be addressed a little bit with a little bit of shadow, because there's shadows, you know, around all these different objects. It'd be good to throw down a little bit of shadow there, but that stamp is wet, so we'll just leave it as is. Okay, so let's take a look at these again, just from a color application standpoint. I felt that when applying the colors to this card, it felt the same to me as any of the papers that I've been using. How this one is drying, though, looks a little bit different than this one, the chrome coat. Okay, so let me do, you know, since I'm waiting for this object, the boating fisherman, to dry anyway, let me go back now, because I might have used a lot more of that aqua, the Adirondack Lights, and that type of ink has been known to kind of dry a little bit more dull, you know, when you use it this way. So what I'll do is I'll go back in and I'll try to add another layer of ink, and I'll do that with the Marvy number 10. It's a very bright blue. And we'll reintroduce that, or just introduce another coating of it. And we'll see if we can kind of brighten up some of these areas in here. Now, one of the things that Linda did, as you see in her original there, is she's added a quote, which looks really fantastic in the scene. I didn't really leave that very light, so I'm not going to add the quote. The quote, you know, I mean, it wouldn't be very helpful in terms of, you know, discovering the properties of this paper in relation to how the inks apply to it, so it's not really important. It looks great in terms of a compositional element, though. Now applying this on top of the paper, it feels good. It's applying nice and smooth, and it's doing what I had hoped it would do, and that's kind of brighten up the surrounding areas. Okay. I wonder if I can add a little bit of, yeah, that boating fisherman sure looks wet to me, so let's see if I can dab this down a little bit and get a little of that color in there, just for some kind of shadow effects. Kind of anchors the boat down a little bit, wouldn't you think? And see, I'm not using black, but I'm using some blue, okay? Because that's the color of that area, so Just going with a little bit of a dull version of blue. Okay, well actually it's a little bit bright, I guess. A dry application of blue, you might say. Okay, and that kind of anchors the boat down into the scene. Do it on the chrome coat as well. Yeah, the boat is dry enough. Okay, looks like so. Here, let's get a little bit closer. You see that shadow in the water? Let me add a little bit more to this one. It's getting drier on my tip, I think, the blue, so it's kind of applying in a little bit of a softer application. Okay. Ranger chrome coat. A little bit more of this one up here. Okay. I'm just applying some of that blue over the tops of those trees. I was curious to see if the trees got any darker. Alright. Alright, well, I'm trying to think of what to say about this in terms of, I'm looking at Linda's as well. I don't know. I think her scene looks great. With that quote, they look better than mine. Or it looks better than mine. I think what I will do is I will spray... Now, I'm curious to know what paper this is. I'm going to guess that this one is the Ranger paper. Just because the variation in values of those two impressions here, this one and this one, I mean, obviously this paper can get very black, because that's it right there. You know, these images down here are very black, but this one's a little bit more grayish. But, I don't know what to say. I like both of these, alright? I think I like the chrome coat maybe a little bit more, but I think the Ranger is just fine. But a spray coating on this, I believe, is the great equalizer in terms of finish. I think where this is turning a little bit grayer, if you spray this, I'm assuming, if it looks like all the rest of the paper ink combinations that I've done, it'll bring it, right back to, a black in there. So that's not a big deal to me. I don't even worry about that. The things that I tend to concern myself with is if a paper is too coated. I love those papers though, the feel of it, the ones that are super, super glossy. Those types, when you get to especially if you start off with like a Adirondack Lights ink, in the amount that I used, where I just kind of, used the re-inker fluid and puddled it in here and was slathering it on. Sometimes the super glossy papers, the ink sits on the surface of the paper a little bit longer. I mean, it does absorb. It's not like as if you can wipe into it and it's going to wipe all your colors off or anything like that. But with the amount of ink that we use, often by the times you get to on the second or third paper or color over, built up over the base layers, it just doesn't apply. But these ones did, obviously, because it got this dark right here. And I can see the values here in terms of the transition of colors from light, medium, dark. I can still see the light tones in here, although you don't see it too much, but it does affect the overall. But I should apply some of my ink onto Linda's scene. Can we do a collaboration, Linda, if that's okay with you? Let me see how these will apply on the top of this, okay? I'm not going to change the spirit of her scene, but what I'll do is I'll just add a little bit of a additional tone, okay? And we'll see how it applies. We'll see if there's anything different going on, okay? And again, you know, as far as my wrist goes, my hand is on this table right here, okay? And I'm just resting it, and I'm just going for these little swipes here. And there's absolutely no pressure on my arm or joints or anything like that. I mean, I guess if you never do this at all, you know what I mean, or use your hands too much, you know, maybe you'll get tired. But when you kind of stay in an ergonomic motion and you use a motion of I don't know, I was going to say least resistance, but just the smoothest motion that you can in the direction that's the most natural for those, you know, part of the body to do it in. You won't feel too different now. Everyone has their own issues, you know, like some people have had arthritis before, but that's kind of what this is for. There's no force of it, okay? We don't achieve any darkness with, you know, force, okay? This is how I do it. I'm kind of pressing a little bit there, but not much. I'm not pressing it like that, okay? I'm just pressing down on the cushion a little bit, and as I come up, I'm just going like that. I'm kind of lifting it up with my fingers, okay? And that's better than going like this and force, you know what I mean, like that. I mean, even though, I mean, that's just sponge, so it's not using too much pressure. Yes, you're just depressing kind of a thin, light sponge down on the paper. But see, this is getting a little bit more vibrant, I guess you can say. And see, I'm kind of just oscillating, and I just want a little bit more here, a little bit more in the shadows here. I don't know what this is going to look like when it dries. I would imagine it'll look pretty much the same, but we'll see. Do you like that? Let's come across like this a little bit more. Alright, Linda, we make a good team, huh? Looks pretty good. How about a little bit more up in the upper left and right? The upper left and that upper left felt a little bit different than below. I don't know if she sprayed this or something, but it's going on a little bit differently. I'm not sure why. So I don't know, maybe that's a factor. But down here, I don't know, it feels exactly the same. But up here it's starting to do that thing where it becomes a little bit textured in here and a little bit pebbly. Could be from the color that was used up there, if it was a different color that was used down below. It doesn't look bad or anything like that, but it does seem a little bit different. See, I'm kind of haloing it a little bit, and doesn't that feel a little bit more contained? And if you watched my last video too, or, well, not in the last, was it in the last one? Maybe 2 videos ago. I showed this thing where if you go a little bit darker in your shadows, okay, these lighter areas will stand out as lighter by contrast a little bit more. It doesn't, I don't want to, like I said, change the spirit of it. I'm just doing a little bit of a minor tweak, deepening the shadows maybe 1 or 2 steps more. Now, she says she has a range of values in the Marvy pad, so let's go to this dark blue and just add a little bit more in there. All I'm doing is this type of thing, like this. Okay? Right here in the corner. I can add a little bit here and there. How about some more right in here? The whole thing is just patience, just allowing it to build up naturally, kind of in its own time. I mean, we don't want the process to last, we don't want to take a month on a scene or anything like that, but, a couple minutes here and there. For this one extra color, I don't know, it's like an extra minute or so on the scene, but see this right now? Now I have, the shadows are a little bit darker, so it's bringing attention to those characters just a little bit more, and also to her quote down here. That looks really fantastic. Okay. And did I use black on this? I don't remember if I did or not. Let me try that on mine, okay? I'm going to bring a little bit of black ink. I thought I did, but it doesn't look too dark because the scene was probably very wet, so let's go a little bit more in the shadows. Okay, a little dab here and there in the corner of the scene. A little bit of a vignette and maybe a slightly darker edge to that bottom of the lakeside cabin stamp. Top left and right corners, just to kind of contain the scene a little bit more. Alright, how's that look? It's not too bad. Maybe kind of interesting to have an oak branch or something like that hanging in from the top. Okay, that was the chrome coat. Let's try it with the Ranger. Yeah, the Ranger is a little bit, it's drawing a little bit lighter in value with my ink. Now, papers are going to react differently to different inks, okay, different ink brands, okay? So what you see happening with mine, choice of media on this scene might be indicative of, what that might look like with other media, but not necessarily so, okay? There's a lot of different inks out there, so you'd have to kind of give them a test. But, I don't know, this still looks, or this one, this looks pretty good to me. I mean, we're talking about, very subtle differences here. If I were out of my own paper, I would have no problem using this as my main glossy, okay? If I started using it and that's what I had, I would not miss my other papers. As far as what I've found, on this scene right here. And I think, this scene would give me a pretty good indication of what to expect from that ink. Let's Let's get a little streak in here too, and the water has that. Okay. Linda happened to mention that she had some other scenes, but she didn't want to send it in. It was, well, I forgot what she said, but oh, I don't know where she's mentioned it, but oh, she said it'd be too embarrassing. You know what I mean? But don't, you know, if there's anything that anyone ever wants me to take a look at, don't be embarrassed at all. You know. It's not, you're not being, not sending it in to me for a grade or something like that. Usually I can take a look and I can make suggestions. I haven't seen a scene where something's just kind of gone, you know, I don't know, what's the scene, what's the term? Kind of off the hinges or whatever, but what I mostly see, and I saw it all the time in my workshops that I used to give, sometimes the scene wasn't kind of resolved or as resolved as someone might want, okay? But, I don't know, just about, I don't know if it was in every case, but at least it was over 9 out of 10 cases. There wasn't anything that really happened that went wrong in a scene, okay? For me, it was just a matter of, I thought those scenes could use just an extra little touch of something. Well, I mean, or 2 or 3 touches of something, okay? To kind of bring it into kind of a full, I don't know, a fully realized piece. That it might have been adding on one more color. It might have been, you know, they might have gone through all of their tones already, like say light, medium, darks, or whatever. Like these rocks down here, I think these look excellent. They're nice and rich, but what I'm doing is I'm just darkening this a little bit more, and now I feel that the rocks seem a little bit more dimensional because there's a little bit more shadow in some of it, okay? This is Linda's scene again. See that right there? It kind of anchors it off a little bit more, okay? Same thing with these rocks in here. There's a little bit of shadows in here, and I'm kind of, it's not a real saturated ink I'm using. See how light that is right there? Okay. So it's like I'm kind of applying kind of a little swatch of gray. And it's kind of a light gray. Now the more gray that I put down, right, the more ink that you put down, the darker it's going to get. So, you know, it could be anything from a 10%, 5% gray or something like that. And then if you keep tapping it, then you can get into the 20% or something of that sort. And if you work with kind of a drier brush, then it's easier to apply, okay? It's less, well, I wouldn't say it's easier, it's less precarious to apply because you're not applying a lot of ink at any given time, so it goes on really gradually and you have a lot more control over it, okay? Not that I think everything in life has to have control or anything like that, but when it comes to applying ink, oh, I don't know, I think it's always a little easier to just kind of get what you want kind of the first time around and to just let it happen slowly and come into focus slowly, rather than, you know, if something goes on that you didn't like, it's just easier to kind of work with a much lighter version of that, I don't know, application of whatever you did. than to try to eradicate a very dark one that's on the paper. Okay, that was black, and this is what I could have done too. Let's see, let's apply a little bit of this darker blue, this the number 3 blue, that I believe that's probably the color that she used on there, and just like on mine, I'm just adding a little bit of a darker swatch of it just to kind of increase the intensity, I guess, and value of it a little bit. Her paper feels a little bit different, you know, I would say, kind of doing this. Especially the top portion, like I said, it feels kind of absorbent for some reason. But still, you know, still good to work with, though. Look at her scene. Her scene looks better than mine. Alright. This is our collaborative work with the kind of mystery paper involved. Ranger and Chrome Coat, okay. Now this one, is, oops, this one is the same as one of these, but I just have no idea. Like I said, I'm speculating that this one is, these two are the same, but I could be mistaken. Alright, let me see if there's any kind of visible difference between the two. I just don't see it. You know, I mean, if I'm really scrutinizing, like I said, this one seems a little bit lighter as far as the trees go. But again, if I spray these, I think it'll be, you know, virtually identical. You know, maybe. To my trained eye, is it different? I don't know. I guess. But not... I'm looking, like, all over the rest of the scene. Okay, the chrome coat is darker, okay, because I'm looking down here, too, and I'm looking down here now. But let's spray this one, and let's see if that's the case, okay? Now, I recommend spraying to everyone, because I just think scenes end up coming out looking kind of a little bit more deep and rich in terms of the color scheme, okay? But see, this is, as it's drying out more, it's kind of dulling down again. But the ink applications are just absolutely fine. I don't like a paper, and I've worked with some in the past that, as far as this technique goes, it does have a little bit of a, you know, kind of a different feel in terms of the ink. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that these papers are bad. You know, these papers are meant for, like, the printing industry, you know. They print business cards on, you know, and postcards and things like that. That's this exact type of paper, you know. It's cover stock, you know. It's doing covers for books or whatever in a nice glossy format. Okay. But before I do that, let me just show you what I like to do again. And this is kind of going off of the intended goal of the one of these pens of mine. This isn't working too good. White gel pen. Okay, I'm getting better at saying gel pen without having to correct myself, saying white paint pen, because I said, I mean, it's been a long time since I used the white paint pens. But, I don't know, I just said it so much in my early years of Stampscapes because they didn't have gel pens, you know, at one point in time. Okay, adding a few little highlights down in the water. To represent specular light, light that's whiter, brighter than white, light that's brighter than white, sorry. And it's those little sparkles that, you know, if you're sitting at your desk or your computer or something like that, if you look around, you'll see this little, probably a little highlight of some sort on everything, bottles, glass, on your glasses, whatever. And it kind of makes your water a little bit more shimmery too, like that, okay? Alright, so that looks pretty fun, I think. So like that, and that's what it looks like from a distance, at normal viewing distance. Okay, I have to keep looking. Yeah, this is a Ranger paper. Alright, now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go outside and spray these. And then we'll see what it looks like. I especially am curious about the Ranger and seeing how dark my imagery is at that point in time. I think it'll bring it back to what it looked like when it was kind of wet, you know, as far as the impression went. And I think all the colors will get darker too and more rich and deep. Okay? And I'm not going to spray Linda's, okay, in case she wants to add anything else to it. Once you spray something, you can't really stamp over it or add any more dye-based inks. I mean, I can go in and add more things like, you know, gel pen details and things like that. But as far as the ink application goes, that's kind of, you know, done with. So, but I think it is. I think everything looks fully realized as far as the values and everything like that goes. So, no need for more, you know, sponged ink applications. Okay, we are sprayed as far as that acrylic spray went, and I used a workable matte fixative. Okay, it's really meant for things like charcoals and graphite and whatnot. Hold on, let me go grab it and I'll show you what it. Okay, this is what I was using, a Blair spray fix. It wouldn't be my first choice, but it just happens to be what I have on hand. I've used up all the rest of my spray clear acrylic sprays. Anyway, no odor, workable matte fixative. Workable means that, you know, when you're doing things like charcoals or pastels or something like that, you can spray it and still add, you know, additional charcoal, graphite, pastels, etc. In this case, though, I don't think I can add more dye-based inks over it, you know, because that's not what that's really for. But it probably has a little bit more of a matte finish to it. I like it glossy usually, but the colors on this did get a little bit more saturated when I sprayed it, because I could see it kind of got a little bit darker. The trees stayed as dark as they were before, which is a little bit more of a gray tone. I don't know why, but it could be that I just didn't stamp it out as dark to begin with, but see, the reeds down here are nice and dark, you know. So, I don't know, maybe it's from running other colors of ink over the top, maybe. Maybe it's the darkest where I didn't, you know, it could be. See this little band of it right here? Those trees are darker, right? But you can see I didn't run the blue over the top of it, so maybe that blue Ranger ink over the top of those trees made them more dull. But see here, I used this in the foreground, right? So I didn't put too much ink over the top of it, and so maybe those ones remain nice and dark. See this right here? This is a little bit darker. I probably used a little bit more blue coming across over that, and I think those rocks are a little bit lighter in tone. And see these trees over here? Yeah, that's what's happening. These trees are lighter over here, right? I mean darker over here, where there isn't blue in the background, and those trees over there are lighter than those trees because I've used that blue over the top. So isn't that interesting? And I don't think it's the Marvy inks that are doing it. I think it's the Ranger inks being applied over the top of Marvy inks. That did it on this paper, okay? Now let's take a look in this and let's try to scrutinize this, okay? We can see a lot of inks being used in here, but I see the trees still remain fairly dark, okay? Now see, that rock up there is just as dark, so I have a feeling that the Ranger paper, I mean, this is just preliminary here. I'd have to do like a couple more of these, but that sure looks like what's going on right there, just using that ink over the top. On this particular paper, for some reason, the chemistry of it, where this one right here, the chrome coat, it looks like whatever it did with those impressions kind of retained the value of it, even with the additional tones laid over the top. Okay, let's add a little bit of some shadows into some of these rocks right here. So you can still add some alcohol ink shading if you want to. With a pen, again, I don't know. I guess this will test a little bit what that might look like on that paper. It feels pretty good though. Alright, so here we have 1, 2, 3 scenes. 3 identical compositions for the most part. I didn't put that little yellow light. That's a really nice touch by Linda. The window. I didn't bother doing it on here because it didn't really pertain to the goal of the video here, but here's this other impression too that I made earlier. And this is on the Ranger, that black ink. Okay, it's a little bit gray over there, but that's kind of the way I stamped it out. See how dark that is? So that looks pretty good, you know. I think the chrome coat looks pretty good. I do think the Ranger looks pretty good. And whatever this was right here, that looks good as well, alright? As far as my preference goes, chrome coat probably, but I think that Ranger is excellent. That's better than a lot of the papers that I've used in the past. Just in my experiments, you know, I picked up about 3 different types of papers at Kelly Paper. And you can check out that video, but what it did was it pebbled kind of up in the, you know, the right and left side when I added in too much color onto them. And another one was a little bit different, so the Ranger is holding up very well, okay, against that type of saturation. It's just that combination of that aqua on there, I think, lightened it up a little bit. So maybe if you don't use that gigantic slathering of aqua like I did, okay, on something like this, maybe you can use that aqua, but just don't do it in a really super thick saturation. You should be fine. I mean, the scene looks fine to me, but if, you know, if we're kind of talking about fine-tuning and tweaking and really scrutinizing it, you know, then I guess I didn't need to worry about that slathering. But then again, I didn't use as much of that aqua ink on this paper, so, you know, if I was to do further tests, you know, maybe it would be revealing as far as the treatment of each papers and how they react to not only the media, but the amount of media that's been applied. Okay? Alright, now, I think Linda's scene here looks fantastic. I did a little bit of tweaking on it just to darken the shadows a little bit here and there. I think her color application was beautiful and smooth, and she had a lighting scheme working on here. Notice that she's left the cabin rooftop light to reflect light that's coming down upon it. We have this little area down here that's illuminated for our subject matter, and you certainly don't want to make this area too dark because we have this quote down here and it needs to be readable. Alright, so anyways, I was really looking forward to this experiment here, because these are the kinds of questions that I get all the time, and I don't think I had used the Ranger paper before, but it looks pretty good. I'm impressed by it, and I enjoyed working on it. I have no issues as far as the applications of ink, and I don't know, it looks fine to me. Looking around for other things, you know, things that I would do on these scenes, I would add a little bit more pigment ink, maybe. I think this would be a perfect opportunity for it in here and to soften up some of these clouds and whatnot. I'm not going to do that on these scenes, but I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, these papers, all three of them, work pretty well. They don't feel really any different than any other paper that I've used. And they look pretty true to form. I get nice crisp impressions on all of them. And even with the amount of ink that I use, I really pile it on, you know, in terms of the layering goes, you know. I don't know, that, you know, it stood up to that heavy saturated look that I tend to go for in almost all my scenes, but especially in these ones, just to kind of test it out. I really laid down a lot of the blues in here. So anyways, I hope this test comes in handy for anyone that's curious about paper. I get these questions on paper all the time, so I guess what we've done in this video is we've tested one more type of paper. I think I've used that chrome coat before in my other video on the glossy paper tests video. I'm not sure what video number that is, but it's on our listings if you're ever curious about watching it. So anyways, thanks for sitting through and taking a look at this little experiment here, and hope it comes in handy for you and hope you enjoyed it.